The Great God AWTO by Clark Ashton Smith. Originally published 1940. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Classroom lecture given by the Most Honorable Eru Sagus, Professor of Himmericanian Archaeology at the World University of Toshtush, on the 365th day of the year 5998. Males, females, androgynes, and neuters of the class in archaeology. You have just learned from my previous lectures all that is known or inferred concerning the crudely realistic art and literature of the ancient Himmericans. With some difficulty, owing to the fragmentary nature of the extant remains, I have reconstructed for you their bizarre and hideous buildings, their rude mechanisms. Also, you are now familiar with the unimaginably clumsy, corrupt, and inefficient legal and economic systems that prevailed among them, together with the garblings of crass superstition and scant knowledge that bore the sacred names of the sciences. You have listened, not without amusement, to my account of their ridiculous amatory and social customs, and have heard with horror the unutterable tale of their addiction to all manner of violent crimes. Today I shall speak regarding a matter that throws into even grosser relief the low-grade barbarism, the downright savagery of this bloody and besotted people. Needless to say, my lecture will concern their well-nigh universal cult of human sacrifice and self-immolation to the god AWTO, a cult which many of my confreres have tried to associate with the worship of the Hinduan deity Juggernaut, or Juggernaut. In this cult, the wild religious fanaticism of the Himmericans, together with the national bloodlust for which they were notorious, found its most congenial and spacious outlet. If we grant the much disputed relationship between AWTO and Juggernaut, it seems plain that the latter god was an extremely mild and refined variation of AWTO, worshipped by a gentler and more advanced people. The rites done to Juggernaut were localized and occasional, while the sacrifices required by AWTO took place at all hours on every street and highway. However, in the face of certain respected authorities, I am inclined to doubt if the two religions had much in common. Certainly nothing apart from the ritual usage of crushing wheels of ponderous earth vehicles, such as you have seen in our museums among the exhumed relics of antiquity. It is my fond hope that I shall eventually find evidence to confirm this doubt, and thus vindicate the Hinduans of the blackest charge that legend and archaeology have brought against them. I shall have made a worthy contribution to science if I can show that they were among the few ancient peoples who were never tainted by the diabolic cult of AWTO originating in Himmericua. Because of a religion so barbarous, it has sometimes been argued that the Himmericanian culture, if one can term it such, must have flourished at an earlier period in man's development than the Hinduan. However, in dealing with a realm of research that borders upon prehistory, such relative chronology can be left to theorists. Excepting, of course, in our own superior modern civilization, human progress has been slow and uncertain, with many intercalated dark ages, many reversions to partial or total savagery. I believe that the Himmericanian epoch, whether prior to that of the Hinduans or contemporary with it, can well be classified as one of these dark ages. To return to my main theme, the cult of AWTO. It is doubtless well known to you that in recent years certain irresponsible so-called archaeologists, misled by a desire to create sensation at the cost of truth, have fathered the fantastic thesis that there never was any such god as AWTO. They believe, or profess to believe, that the immolatory vehicles of the ancients and the huge destruction of life and limb caused by their use were quite without religious significance. A premise so absurd could be maintained only by madmen or charlatans. I mention it merely that I may refute and dismiss it with all the contempt that it deserves. Of course, I cannot deny the dubiousness of some of our archaeological deductions. Great difficulties have attended our researches in the continent-embracing deserts of Hamiraqua, where all food supplies and water must be transported for thousands of miles. The buildings and writings of the ancients, often made of the most ephemeral materials, lie deep in ever-drifting sands that no human foot has trod for millenniums. Therefore, it is small wonder that guesswork must sometimes fill the gaps of precise knowledge. I can safely say, however, that few of our deductions are so completely proven, so solidly based, as those relating to the AWTO cult. The evidence, though largely circumstantial, is overwhelming. Like most religions, it would seem that this cult was obscure and shadowy in its origin. Legend and history have both lost the name of the first promulgator. The earliest cars of immolation were slow and clumsy, and the rite of sacrifice was perhaps rarely and furtively practiced in the beginning. There is no doubt, too, that the intended victims often escaped. AWTO, at first, can hardly have inspired the universal fear and reverence of later epochs. Certain scraps of Hamiraqanian printing, miraculously preserved in airtight vaults and deciphered before they could crumble, have given us the names of two early prophets of AWTO, Anreford and Dodds. These amassed fortunes from the credulity of their benighted followers. It was under the influence of these prophets that the dark and baleful religion spread by leaps and bounds, until no Hamiraqanian street or highway was safe from the thunderously rolling wheels of the sacrificial cars. It is doubtful whether AWTO, like most other savage and primordial deities, was ever represented by graven images. At least no such images have been recovered in all our delvings. However, the rusty remains of the iron-built temples of AWTO, called grajis, have been exhumed everywhere in immense numbers. Strange vessels and metal implements of mysterious hieratic use have been found in the grajis, together with traces of oils by which the sacred vehicles were anointed, and the vehicles lie buried in far-spread, colossal scrap heaps. All this, however, throws little light on the deity himself. It is probable that AWTO, sometimes known as Motaur, was simply an abstract principle of death and destruction, and was believed to manifest himself through the homicidal speed and fury of the fatal machines. His demented devotees flung themselves before these vehicles as before the embodiment of the god. The power and influence of AWTO's priesthood, as well as its numbers, must have been well nigh beyond estimation. The priesthood, it would seem, was divided into at least three orders. The mechanics, or keepers of the grajis, the shoppers, who drove the sacred vehicles, and an order whose special name has been lost, that served as guardians of innumerable wayside shrines. It was at these shrines where a mineral liquid called gas, used in the fueling of the vehicles, was dispensed from crude and curious pumping mechanisms. Several well-preserved mummies of mechanics in sacerdotal raiment, blackened by the sacred oils, have been recovered from grajis in the central Hamiraqanian deserts, where they were apparently buried by sudden sandstorms. Chemical analysis of the oiled garments has so far failed to confirm a certain legendary belief current among the degenerate bushmen who form the scant remnant of Hammurabi's teeming myriads. I refer to a belief that the oils used in anointing those ancient cars were often mixed with unctuous matters obtained from the bodies of their victims. However, a usage so barbarous would have conformed well enough with the principles of the hideous cult. Further research may establish the old legend as a truth. From the evidence we have unearthed, it is plain that the cult assumed enormous power and widespread proportions within a few decades of its inception. The awful apex was reached in little more than a century. In my opinion, it is no coincidence that the whole period of the AWTO cult corresponded very closely with Hammurabi's decline and ultimate downfall. Some will consider my statements too definite and will ask for the evidence above mentioned. In answer, I need only point to the condition of those skeletons exhumed by thousands from tombs and vaults, dated according to the Hammurabian chronology. Throughout the time period we have assigned to the AWTO cult, there is a steady accelerative increase of bone fractures, often of the most horribly complicated nature. Toward the end, when the fearful cult was at its height, we find few skeletons that do not show at least one or two minor, if not major, breakages. The shattered condition of these skeletons, often decapitated or wholly disarticulated, is almost beyond belief. The rusty remains of the ancient vehicles bear similar witness. Built with an eye to ever greater speed and deadliness, they fall into types that show the ghastly growth and progress of the cult. The later types, found in prodigious numbers, are always more or less dented, broken, crumpled. Often they are mere heaps of indescribably tangled wreckage. Toward the end, it would seem that virtually the whole population must have belonged to the blood-mad priesthood. Going forth daily in the rituals of AWTO, they must have turned their cars upon each other, hurtling together with the violence of projectiles. A universal mania for speed went hand in hand with the mania for homicide and suicide. Picture, if you can, the ever-mounting horror of it all. The nationwide madness of immolation, the carnivals of bloody holidays, the highways lined from coast to coast with crushed and dismembered sacrifices. Can you wonder that this ancient people, their numbers decimated, their mentality sapped and bestialized by dire superstition, should have declined so rapidly, should have fallen almost without a struggle before the hordes of the Orient? Let history and archaeology draw the curtain. The moral is plain, but luckily in our present state of high enlightenment, we have little need to fear the rise of any savage error, such as that which attended the worship of AWTO. Obituary item broadcast from Toshtush on the first day of the year 5999. We are sorry to record the sudden death of Professor Sagos, who had just delivered the last of his series of lectures on Hammurabian archaeology at the University of Toshtush. Returning on the same afternoon to his home in the Himalayas, Professor Sagos was the victim of a most unfortunate accident. His stratosphere ship, one of the very newest and speediest models, collided within a few leagues of its destination with a ship driven by one Jar Goshtar, a chemistry student from the great college of Australindia. Both ships were annihilated by the impact, plunging earthward in a single flaming meteoric mass, which ignited and destroyed an entire Himalayan village. Several hundred people are said to have burned to death in the resultant conflagration. Such accidents are all too frequent nowadays, owing to the crowded condition of stratosphere traffic. We must deplore the recklessness of navigators who exceed the 950-mile speed limit. All who saw the recent accident bear witness that Sagos and Jar Goshtar were both driving at a speed very much in excess of 1,000 miles per hour. While regretting this present-day mania for mere mileage, we cannot agree with certain ill-advised satirists who have tried to draw a parallel between the fatalities of modern traffic and the ancient rites of immolation to the god AWTO. Superstition is one thing, science is another. Such archaeologists as Professor Sagos have proven to us that the worshippers of AWTO were the victims of a dark and baleful error. It is unthinkable that such superstition will ever again prevail. With pride for our achievements and full confidence in the future, we can number the most honorable Professor Sagos among the martyrs of science. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.